Great. I think we can get started now. Thank you again, folks, for being here. We are here at the AFDB annual meetings, and the title of our panel today is Maximizing ADF-17, Africa's Prosperity. For all of us who heard the president's speech yesterday morning, he referenced ADF and the upcoming replenishment happening this year. We know the context. I think folks who are in here understand the context that Africa is in. Not only are we grappling with multiple crises, Africa's story is both one of opportunity and one of hope, because we believe that in spite of the current context of the fiscal space that many countries are facing, in spite of the context of dwindling resources, there's room for us to keep being hopeful about what concessional financing can do for the continent. AFDB's, the African Development Bank Fund, has had about $47 billion since it started, and these funds have gone to projects such as electrification, such as connecting infrastructure gaps, addressing the hunger challenges on the continent. But the reality check is there's still 600 million Africans that are still not connected to the electricity, 280 million that face chronic hunger, and the continent's infrastructure gap is still about $100 billion. But the flip side is Africa is home to the youngest continent, the youngest population. It's also home to a growing fintech population. It's also home to the world's solar potential. So we have fodder within the continent that we can use to propel our development. The challenge oftentimes is capital. And capital is not the only challenge, but it is one of the significant challenges we face. And hence this conversation around concessional financing is critical at this time. 22 countries on the continent of Africa are at risk of debt distress. And what concessional financing can do is plug that hole that we require to address the electrification challenges, to address the infrastructure gap. And today, this conversation will revolve around the 2025 replenishment. And it's not just about pledges. It's really a defining moment to move from incremental funding to transformative funding. Not just to fund Africa's ambition, but to turbocharge it in many ways. And it's not just asking for funds, it's asking for partnerships. It's asking for a bold vision for us to propel our development trajectory on the continent. And with me to have this conversation is a stellar panel. I'd like to introduce my panel as I introduce your name and your title. Please come up on stage and join us. I'll start first with Valerie Dabadi. Please give her a round of applause. Valerie is a division manager for resource mobilization and partnerships at the African Development Bank, and Valerie truly is leading the resource mobilization for ADF replenishment. Next, I'll go to Adama Mariko. Adama is, a round of applause for Adama. He's the Deputy Director for Mobilization, Partnerships and Communications of AFD, and the Secretary General for Finance and Common. And AFD, for those who are unaware, is the group that implements France's policy in the area of development and international solidarity. I'd ask Chris Bull to join us upstage. Chris is the Deputy Director for International Finance Institution Division with the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and is responsible for overseeing the UK's shareholding in and financial contributions of the 5 MDBs. Next, I'll call up Paul Ryan. Paul is a member of the Executive Board and Head of International Finance Division for the Ministry of Finance of Ireland. And last but certainly not the least, Dr. Franny Lotier. She's the partner and CEO of Southbridge Investments in Kigali. We have one more panelist that I'm unclear if is in the room, so we will get started, and if he joins us, he can come up on stage. My name is Sarah Maka, and I'm the Africa Executive Director for the One Campaign. We are holding this panel in concert with the AfriCatalyst group here and based in Senegal, and I look forward to your conversations as we come to our panel and have conversations. We'll also come to you. We want this to be a two-way dialogue. So please have 1 or 2 questions. We'll probably have time for 1 or 2 questions at the end of this. Have 1 or 2 questions ready for us as we come to you. So I'll start with my panel, and I'll start with Valerie. Valerie, you know we have to set the stage. It's a big moment for ADF. What's the ambition? What's the goal this year? ADF-16 was $8.9 billion. What's the goal for ADF-17, and how is AFDB setting the stage in this context of dwindling resources?
It was actually on and I turned it off, so apologies. So thanks very much, Sarah, for that, and thanks to AfriCatalyst and also to the One Campaign for having us discuss this, I think, very important topic. So the context, for many of you who may not know about ADF and the work that we do, the African Development Fund is the concessional financing arm of the African Development Bank Group. We're in our 17th replenishment discussions to take place over the course of 2025. You've raised a question about ambition, and I guess let me give you what the ask is, and then let me tell you sort of what my Christmas present idea is. We have a pipeline of about 300 projects that have been costed at around US $11 billion. So that would be an increase, obviously, over the $8.9 billion of ADF-16. But to be honest, the ambition for ADF-17 would really be that we are able to significantly increase, of course, the resources, but also deliver for our clients. Ultimately, we're here to serve these clients. We focus, I think, on the things that are most important to the clients. That would be infrastructure, regional integration, energy, jobs, youth. Climate, of course, is a big part of the things that we do. And our approach to this, I think, is at this critical time to, of course, engage with all of our partners, including regional member countries that have also been contributing for the first time to the ADF. It's also to give you the communication that is required to advocate on our behalf, such as institutions as ASSET and as One Campaign. One of the things that we maybe don't focus too much on is communication. We're so busy doing the work, and we forget that we have to give the material for you all to advocate on our behalf. And I think the third thing that we would do is also look internally as to how it is that we can innovate. I'll speak a little bit more about the market borrowing option, the ADF going to the markets a little bit later, but those are some of the things that we're looking at for innovations. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. So there's a pipeline of about 11 billion, and innovation is the thing that you have raised. Can I go to you, Chris? The UK has been a leader in investing in ADF over time. In the last few replenishment, the UK, has come out with some pretty good contributions. I think the last contribution was £650 million to ADF. Could you share a bit of ADF's, how you're seeing ADF this year with this replenishment? And also, how do you speak about ADF as an investment for the UK people? Because we understand the current context, and as potential advocates, we have to respond to the donors why they should give to ADF. So can you tell us a little bit about that from the UK vantage point?
Great, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. So let me start with a couple of figures. I mean, everybody here, I think, knows the scale of the need, the $3 trillion per year needed to reach the SDGs, and close to half of that needed for Africa. And at the same time, we're seeing declining bilateral aid flows. The MDBs appear to be the most robust part of the aid architecture, with their unique model capital that's been paid in over decades since the Second World War. And they're already responsible for about 2/3 of aid flows, and that number's just going to increase. The other bit of good news is that the vast majority of that 3 trillion that's needed is going to come not from donors and public sources. It's going to come, or it needs to come, from the private sector and from domestic resource mobilization. And that's where the MDBs have a particularly important catalytic role. So we're seeing, let me lay out 3 reasons why we want to bet on the ADF and the African Development Bank. So the first is this, the innovation that Valerie started talking about and has said that she's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the things that we're planning. But the bank can meet donors where they are and just give them a lot more different innovative ways to contribute. So whether that's guarantees or loans or hybrid capital or SDR channeling, whether that's the climate action window, we need to be ready to innovate, to crowd in money from all sources and in all ways possible. We need to be open to new sources of funding, whether that's new donors, countries, or non-state actors. The second is the need and ADF's ability to find multipliers. So for every dollar or pound that we put into an institution, we often just get £1 out the other side. But with the ADF, we have the potential for leverage if we're successful in getting the market borrowing option agreed, which we're big supporters of. But we can multiply that money even further if we're able to crowd in private investment, or if we're able to use some of that funding to help countries raise money domestically. So the first area, stretching the finance that we provide. Second area, looking for multipliers. And then thirdly, just making sure that we're really laser focused on those sectors that are going to have the most impact. So we know that there is just overwhelmingly strong evidence that growth and jobs are the surest path to poverty reduction. And I thought it was brilliant in the plenary panel just now to see the bank putting entrepreneurs who are creating jobs front and center and giving them such a prominent platform. So maintaining that focus on jobs is the surest way to reduce poverty. And then secondly, focusing on fragility, which is just the biggest brake on growth and on job creation. So looking at the positive and the negative aspects of job creation. As you mentioned, the UK has been a huge supporter of ADF. We were the biggest contributor last year. We plan to remain a very significant contributor this year as well. And we're really excited about the discussions over this weekend where we'll be looking at how we can innovate and stretch our resources even further. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think the takeaways, we can bet on ADF. I think that's a great, and the reasons why we can bet on ADF. Valerie, you teased us a little around this capital market launch, and Chris, you alluded to it on finding ways to leverage our funds with ADF. Valerie, I'd like to bring you in on this and say, what is this journey to the capital market, and what are the implications of that for leverage?
Thanks very much for that. So the market borrowing option would see ADF going to the markets to raise funding. The estimate is US $5 billion per 3-year cycle. A bit of context, the ADF is a 50-year-old institution. So at the time that it was created, it actually, in its statutes, it's written, it doesn't have the right to either borrow or to lend on non-concessional resources. So the very first step that has to happen is that its shareholders must agree to amend the charter. So no small feat for 81 countries, in fact, to go before their parliaments to get this done. But we're happy to announce we're at about 60% of an 85% threshold. So if any shareholders are up here and who have not yet done that, please, it would be great for you to do so, because without that, we actually can't move forward. So what does it mean? It means that we have another source of income for the ADF and therefore for our client countries, and it would be a first for us. It would mean that we're able to leverage this funding. So of course, you take in money that you borrow on the capital markets. You need to match essentially what you're lending to what you're taking in. but it would be concessional still for countries because it would be much less expensive than what countries are currently borrowing, let's say, on the Eurobond market. It also allows us to blend these resources with other types of resources. And essentially, if you think about it, it's 50% nearly of what we got last replenishment. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. I also think that for us, it would be a game changer. Again, what needs to happen is that the charter gets changed. ADF will also have to adopt new guidelines in terms of risk management and the like, but all that is on stream in terms of the work. So we're really looking forward to actually doing that, into adding this source of income onto the ADF balance sheet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because we have advocates in the room. So I think there was a clear call to action. If your shareholders have not amended the charter, we need them to amend the charter, because without that, we can't go to market. And without going to market, we can't pull in some more resources for ADF. Because we're speaking in the capital markets, Franny, I wanted to bring you in. You're a private sector player in the room, and you have worked with ADF. And I think one of the things around private sector participation is the ability to pull in more resources, use the concessional arm that ADF offers to de-risk some investments. And you have had experience with the Vumbuzi Fund, pulling in $2 billion in blended finance facility. So tell me about the private sector's potential to maximize the impact of ADF.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, AfriCatalyst and One, for this important initiative, because ADF is the single most important aspect that can support the transformation of Africa, particularly in the most fragile and vulnerable countries. So why is the private sector interested in ADF? And then I will close with the example that you mentioned of Umbuzi. First of all, because I think that, as Valerie and Chris have said, the current shareholders or contributors to ADF have been doing that for 50 years. They're a little bit tired, and it's difficult now in many countries to raise capital from taxpayers who are tired of giving. For 50 years, it's a little bit long, right? So how can the private sector come in for that? First, if you start with the emerging shareholders, I think ADF can crowd in the private sector in those shareholder countries. Their bilateral entities like BII, AFD and others, who can crowd in private sector capital into ADF, but then things have to change, maybe looking more at performance-based, outcome-based solutions, so that we safeguard why ADF was created in the first place. Secondly, there are the pension funds and sovereign wealth funds in the shareholder countries or member countries of ADF, including here on the continent, where pension funds in Africa now are responsible for $2.4 trillion of capital that they're managing. So that's a huge opportunity for them to come into ADF, because why? Right now they're investing in infrastructure and real estate, which is not very high return, which means they could afford to take more risk in fragile environments and get the same returns roughly that they're making now in the investments that pension funds are taking. And of course that requires changes in the way capital markets work in those countries. Something I'm very proud to say, I chair the board of FSD Africa, which has been working for many years to improve and enhance the quality of capital markets so that this capital can flow. But then there are other ways in which the private sector can come in, and that has to do, for instance, ADF has invested over many years now in a portfolio out there that could be securitized, and the private sector can come in and take over management of those assets and release the capital for reflows and reinvestment by ADF. There are other solutions as well. The insurance industry and the guarantee industry can come in and contribute to ADF-funded projects to increase the risk mitigation capital that is very needed. But the private sector can also benefit from ADF. And I think here's where, and Valerie mentioned it, after 50 years, ADF was created just after the Second World War. We need to reimagine and rethink ADF for today's problems. And that requires changing the charter, but also innovating in what ADF does, the use of funds. And I think there we can look at, for instance, de-risking de-risking in countries so that the private sector can come in, particularly because we have to create so many jobs right now in Africa, and the best way to do that is through the private sector. Accessing the market would be the last area I mentioned before I go into the example that you highlighted, Sarah. I think the private sector is quite hungry now for innovative ways in which to invest. So for example, bonds that are thematic, that the private sector can support and meet some of their ESG objectives, but also because the private sector is keen to see these areas move because it improves their bottom line. When you have good infrastructure in a country, private activity has a higher return. When people are healthier and well educated, you have a well-functioning labor force that the private sector benefits from. So there are linkages between the ADF objectives and the objectives of the private sector that are not profit-oriented, but that do benefit the bottom line. So the Vumbuzi example that you mentioned, Sarah, here we tried to do something innovative, saying Africa has all these incredible land assets that are deforested. There's a huge demand for carbon out there to be traded and exchanged. Can we find a solution that releases those carbon assets to the market but benefits communities and small enterprises? So we put together a structure which crowded in first philanthropic capital through the Bezos Earth Fund and the World Resources Institute, and they put together grant capital to structure the instrument, but also to de-risk the investment. So it's a debt structure, and then we're able to crowd in private investors and MDBs into the structure. So one of the MDBs who came in very early was Badea, the Arab Bank for Development in Africa, and they said, okay, we see you have de-risk capital, we are going to come in with debt that can benefit then from the de-risking and extend lending to communities, to SMEs, who would then restore land, plant trees, and we would capture that carbon certified through digital technology and then sell it or trade it on the market. And I'm happy to say, as of today, all the carbon that will be sequestered from that investment already has takers. So the offtake is 100% subscribed and even more because they're waiting for more assets. And it was MDBs plus philanthropy, but then also bringing in the resources that countries have available, which are the vast natural resources that Africa has. So I think we could do a lot with these types of innovations.
Thank you so much for that example. I think one of the themes coming out is the innovative nature of financing and financing blends that would need to be considered, especially at a time like this. Adam, I wanted to bring you in as an international DFI. You have also worked in concert with AFDB and worked at ADF in particular. Can you tell us how you have worked? What are the structures that you have put together to make projects sing? And also, how are you seeing ADF in this moment?
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we have been here for a couple of days now, and we have really start sensing also the emergency around restructuring, reforming the African Development Bank's tools. And I think that's an opportunity that we have this election this year. And everyone also is assessing the success or the less succeeded that they have in the past, but for sure to look forward and see how this new replenishment and the reforms that can come with it can be better done. I'm really also impressed by the sense of emergency we are sensing here, probably because there is a pushback also in the donor countries regarding international aid and also just a economic reality, which is also the fiscal constraints that the donors are facing. So that means, and I really like what Valérie and Franny was mentioning regarding we need to be more innovative, and also having the ADF being used in a way that financial engineering comes into the discussion. At the end of the day, it's a development bank. We are development bankers, I myself am. And I think that perspective on how we do better using financial innovation to make sure that we add up on the impact and the concessionality is something really, really up to date. So just regarding that, I think one of the first challenges I may mention is that how much would ADF-17 would be, and we have some countries here represented, and I think if we keep doing more than the US now, we still are good, which means not doing zero, but just put up some money on the table and help these to go, but also make sure that reforms come with it. By reforms, I mean where do we invest, how do we invest better, and how we make sure that this classification around countries, because there's two aspects, the sectorial needs, but also the country focused. And in some countries, it cannot be all public money. Somehow, let's face, even though it's poor countries, how do we create an ecosystem for private sector to invest there? And I think that's where the financial engineering come into the discussion. The fact also that we have more capital markets discussion within Africa to mobilize also African capital market, I think it's really something that we should work on. It cannot be just a discussion around how we mobilize our bonds, but it has to be also how the African capital markets is more dynamic, and the public development banks in this ecosystem create the infrastructure, but I think also they can be market makers on making those capital markets dynamic, and ADF is one of the tools we can use in this regard. So just to come with what AFD does, the French Development Agency is an international DFI working in two levels. We are very focused with the France, our shareholders, France mandate, and I think that's where the alignment need to be perfect between France priority in its bilateral investment, which is through AFD, and also France's investment in Africa through the multilateral system, and of course with the African Development Bank in this regard. So partnership is needed, because at the end of the day, France's budget is not extensible. They have to make trade-off between their own bilateral tool, which is AFD, and also the African Development Bank. So for sure here, our work is to align our priorities, and I think the overlap between ADF priorities, African Development Bank priorities with the AFD priorities are perfect. We have a partnership agreement that is $3 billion target of investment in Africa, co-investment. So that goes in sectorial needs such as infrastructure, energy, social, economic development. And of course, at the end of the day, is how we create jobs, how we empower female and youth entrepreneurship, and developing business and creating investment opportunities for the African youth. Those aspects are really to take into account, and I think the budget concerns I was mentioning is really challenging now. But for sure, what we forget is that this is also an opportunity to have the African Development Bank through the EDF to support also the African financial system, the public development bank financial system in Africa. We have 100 public development banks. I mean, the African Development Bank is the visible one, but you have also, BOAD, TDB, Afrexim, etc. But you have national development banks in countries we don't know much about. And having a strong link between the MDB, African Development Bank, with the national development banks is really something we need. And I think having also the ADF supporting the national priorities while also targeting the global needs, meaning the climate and the sustainability agenda, but also at the national level to leverage the national capacities, the national financial capacities which we have in the National Development Bank. So the African Development Bank strategy, going to support the governments by syndicating big projects, billion-dollar projects, I think it's really a good strategy where they can also prepare those projects and be the place where the international DFIs, but also the national institutions, national financial system can be embedded in those solutions, and not to do it all everywhere. So that's probably one of the constraints, but it's not just for the ADF or the African Development Bank, it's for all the PDBs. We cannot just have the projects being prepared from Washington, Paris, Brussels, and then implemented in the national area. Somehow all the DFIs in the world call themselves the last mile bank, but I think the last mile bank is the National Development Bank, and I think that's where the African Development Bank can be really strategic, developing also the national financial public systems through the ADF and also supporting those. So probably I'm going to stop
That's
there
good.
for now, and we can come back.
Yeah, that's good. Adam, you said something that I thought was profound, which is support for ADF is also support for the African financial system. I think it's really important that we start tapping into the capital markets on the continent and also building that out. So that's a strong point. You talked about the challenges. Currently, I think we have a country that is trying to pull out $500 million from the ADF. And we'll have to fill that gap plus, right? One of the good news in this context of dwindling financial resources is we have a country, Ireland, who is a new donor to ADF and is excited about it. So I have the distinct pleasure, Paul, of bringing you in because Ireland gave to ADF recently. It hasn't been a legacy donor. Would love to hear your thoughts about how you came to that conclusion and what your ambition for ADF is this year.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the invite to be here. I think it's a very important discussion, very timely discussion. We are the newest member. We joined in 2020, and I think the shine is still on us as new members for the moment, the 81st member. I suppose the important thing for us is that the share in the African Development Bank is the largest share in any MDB. In my job, I work in the Ministry of Finance, and we are a member of every bank, bar the Inter-American Bank and the Caribbean one, but it's the largest share by far. And I think that builds upon our long established and strong relationship with Africa, both for the government in terms of overseas development aid, but also NGOs as well too. And we've gradually moved on from sort of English-speaking countries in East Africa to the middle of Africa and then to West Africa now as well. So we're opening far more embassies, investing far more money, etc. To date, we put in 100 million, which is a lot for us. And I won't say what we're going to give or what I'd like to give for ADF-17, but certainly it will be at least what we gave the last time, plus maybe a little bit more. And for ADF-21 in the World Bank, we recently gave money. It was a 34% increase. And we are the 5th largest per capita in terms of contribution to that. I suppose we basically joined the bank because it does a very, very good job. It's very relevant. It's very efficient and effective. I think investing in Africa, we're investing for now immediate needs, but also for the future and the long-term needs. And also it meets a lot of our strategic goals in terms of overseas development aid, poverty alleviation first and foremost for the ADF, but obviously then climate, energy, inclusive policies, women and girls, fragility, and then the private sector and DRM as well, and SDGs. And it's really, really important to us in terms of why we gave to the ADF. As first and foremost, it has a very, very strong impact real impact on the ground. And I think that's the key point, and obviously Valerie and our colleagues will make their own case, but that's a very strong business case, I think, for the future and going forward. And then I suppose secondly then, we'd really like the strategic approach of the ADF, underpinned by very, very strong policy commitments, and then having a real impact on the ground as well. I think they're the 2 key points. So for us at this stage, as you said, we have a small number of donors. The money is declining over time. We then have big impacts such as the US review, and a lot of other pressures that are sort of negative pressures. But I think we have positive pressures. We have a new president coming in. We do have the ADF-17 replenishment starting this weekend. It's a challenge, but it's also very positive. It's a good chance to sort of recast what we're doing and try and resell it. And then we have the financing for development in Seville in about 4 weeks' time. Again, a good chance to sell ADF and the bank. And then lastly then, in my role across all the NDBs, but obviously we're involved in G20, as a guest of South Africa this year. Again, having a South African presidency, or an African presidency, I should say, of G20 is really, really important with MDB reform. So a few key things just in terms of ADF going forward. I think it's for Valerie and her colleagues to continue the very positive open engagement they have with donors. I think it's very, very positive. I do like this bank a lot. It's possible to meet the president, the various VPs, the teams as well. Keep the engagement going. Keep talking to existing donors, but into new ones, new governments, non-government actors. And I think what we'd like to sell, we're moving on from overseas development aid to overseas investment, and sell it as an investment partnership. Basically, you know, what are the needs of donors? What are the needs of Africa? How can you be sort of a matchmaker between the two of them? So other things mentioned by Chris there would be looking at more innovative means of giving money in as well too. It is very, very difficult. I suppose the key point then is to keep selling the partnership with the ADF as an investment in Africa for the future, and that we're helping people stay in Africa, have proper jobs, have a proper life, etc., etc. And it's, I don't like the phrase win-win, but it is a win-win, because if Africa gets more stable, more prosperous, there's a benefit then for the rest of the world as well too.
Absolutely. Moving from overseas aid to overseas investment. I really like that. And you talked a lot about the G20 leadership of South Africa this year, which is really important. Adam, I wanted to bring you in to talk about the finance in common, because that's one of the hats you also wear. Before that, Valerie, I'll put you on watch, because first of all, you were commended, and the ADF was commended. I hope you heard that it's an approachable bank, it's easy to work with. You guys have won some awards on transparency, but I'd love to hear about the reforms going forward, because there's always room for improvement. So what is ADF thinking about reforming going forward? And then last but not the least, I'll come out to you all with questions that you may have. So please prepare them as we come through. But Adama, please talk about finance in common and G20.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's also, you know, just adding on what my colleague just said, it's also a matter of credibility for the international financing system to have the ADF-17 being a success. First of all, because 2025 is a strategic year, as it was mentioned. We are, you know, a few weeks ahead of the Financing for Development Summit, the fourth one in Sevilla. It's a UN-driven process. It happens that it's 10 years after the Paris Agreement, 10 years after the launch of the SDGs, 10 years, you know, after also, you know, the Paris Agreement and all these discussion from Ethiopia, the Addis Ababa. And for sure, we have now the opportunity to match the international agenda to make it more coherent. I mean, the difficulty the public development finance ecosystem is facing is that sometimes we have too many maps to follow at the same time. And I think 2025 is the year that we can make coherence in this and clarity in what are the priorities, clarifying the mandates of the development banks, and put the means, you know, on the priority of those mandates. So ADF replenishment is definitely a test for all over the place, because 2024, half of the world was in elections. You know, the biggest countries on the planet, US, India, etc. So we probably was in a time where the discussion was very technical under the leadership of Brazil. But this year, Brazil is still having the COP30, South Africa, the G20, and we have the FFD4 and African Development Bank replenishment. So let's see what happens there. And I think all the donors should also put, you know, some seriousness behind these reforms, support the Minister of Finances, support the development finance ecosystem, that's where finance in common come in, and the national institution. And I think also Africa is also taking this seriously. That's why I'm saying that it's a test for all over the rest of the world, because the African countries will face also, I think, their responsibilities, even though the challenge is big, in this replenishment process, also their contribution within the African Development Bank. So let's see what happens.
Excellent. Adaba, I think you brought some excellent points. Number one is a chance for coherence, because with the 10-year mark of many moments in development, this is a moment for, are we really serious as an international community in this credibility in this process? But I also think that what was not said, that should be said, is African countries also gave to the ADF, right? So we had a representative from Benin who unfortunately couldn't join us, but African countries are contributing to this as well. So there's a signaling as well from the continent that yes, there's solidarity from the international community, but there's also internal recognition from Africa that we have skin in the game. Valerie, before I call audience for questions, reforms. How is ADF going to change to utilize its resources more effectively and efficiently? And what is up on the horizon?
Is it working?
Yes,
Okay,
it is.
perfect. So in terms of reforms, I want to say that we actually have a very good track record on innovations at the ADF. It's simply because our balance sheet was not that large, and so we had to continuously evolve over the years and innovate over the years. Let me give you a couple of examples. We have something created in 2015 called the Private Sector Facility. Its role is to use donor grant resources to incentivize private sector investment in ADF countries. We like to say that imitation is the best form, if you will, of adoration, in a sense because it's something which has been copied by other sister institutions. We've also introduced something way back called the partial credit and the partial risk guarantee, which was used recently, in fact, by Benin, which couldn't be here today, by Togo, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire. And it allows these countries to use a part of their allocation, their performance-based allocation, to leverage resources from the markets. And with our guarantee, the pricing is lowered. And so this was done in Benin. They raised about 350 million euro, saved about 20 basis points. And what also that this does is domestic resource mobilization. On their side, they're able to enlarge, if you will, their receipts. So those are the kinds of things I think that we will continue to do. I think we have a mandate from our shareholders to continue on this particular path. We're looking also at tweaking something that we call the Project Preparation Facility. So we will continue, I think, on this path. What's great is the partnerships that we have, the countries that we have here with us. The UK was a donor to the Climate Action Window, which was something new and under ADF-17. Ireland has spoken and said they're in fact, they're our newest shareholder, but they're quite excited about the work that we do. And we have an excellent partnership with IFD, with co-financing and exchange of staff. So I would say, you know, the great big headline is, of course, market borrowing, but all the rest of the things we've done over the years, we will continue, I think, to do that and go forth and serve our clients better. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Valerie. Now to you all. I wonder if you have any questions for our panel here. Maybe I'll let you in on a little secret. One of the reasons we wanted to do this is we want advocates to go out and talk about ADF, just given how important concessional financing is. So you are our advocates. If there's anything we can clarify, any information we can provide, would love to hear from you. We have some mics roaming, so if I can see a show of hands, if there are any questions. There's a gentleman in the middle. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions only. I don't think that mic is on. Okay, while we get the mic on, any other questions on the side? Okay.
Thanks. I'm Dr. Hope Uwija from the Africa Economic Forum. One of the key issues that have arisen very recently is the serious decline in terms of foreign aid assistance for the health sector in Africa, which every one of us agree has to be driven forward if Africa's economy and prosperity has to move on. My question to ADF, to the panelists, is whether this is being taken into consideration and how ADF want to encourage both shareholders in this fund and countries within Africa to realize this serious deficit and use the ADF as a tool to drive investment into the health sector and, more importantly, to drive economic productivity and prosperity in the continent. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hope. I'll put it down to my panel. His question effectively was in the context of dwindling aid. How do we use ADF to plug some of the gaps on the financial sort of landscape, but also how do we incentivize African governments themselves to start working on increasing their financing? I'm not sure how ADF does that, but perhaps Valerie, we'll start with you if anyone else wants to add to that.
Sure, thanks very much. So I want to assure the audience that our work is to raise as much resources as we can for our client countries. And those are the 37 countries that benefit from the ADF. We're obviously aware of the situation, and we are engaging with our existing shareholders as well as potential new shareholders to contribute to the fund. You know, the particularity of the fund is that when you come in as a participant, your money goes into the common pool. It then comes out the other side after a series of calculations in terms of your performance and what the country sort of gets, and there's a headline number. What this provides is essentially efficiency, because when we do this exercise, countries get allocated a certain amount and the like. There is also a programming and a planning that happens at the national level that has to be, so the way that the resources are used, on our end, we produce something called a country strategy paper, of course, with the buy-in of the government, of civil society and the like, that provides you typically a 4 to 5 year horizon of what we will do along with all the other partners. The countries themselves have a national development plan. There is a concordance between what we do and the national development plan to make sure that there's alignment, if you will. And so in terms of the gap and what is happening, we are engaging the countries. We're, of course, doing this on a continuous basis to try and plug this gap. I think the other bit is looking towards new shareholders and doing innovations. I've spoken about the MBO. New shareholders, I think I'm always chasing after new ones, but you must know that providing money to an MDB is something which is a years-long process. You know, nobody sort of opens their bag and gives you money after meeting you 10 minutes, right? It's something where they come in, they check under the hood and look at exactly what you've been doing, see if there's alignment and the like. But these are things that are ongoing, that we will continue even, you know, when we finish this particular replenishment process, because my job is to always be on the lookout for new partnerships and, of course, new resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. Franny, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for the question. I'll use 3 hats in responding to it. One, because I was the Senior Vice President at the African Development Bank when we were doing one of the most critical ADF replenishments, and the innovations that Valerie mentioned were very well received by the funders at that time, and I am very happy to hear that it has actually contributed to private sector de-risking, especially the partial credit and partial risk guarantees, but also the private sector window. So here are the 3 things that I think ADF can do in the short run that would then deliver value in the outer years. The first one, and I know this, the UK has done this several times, Canada as well, is to prepay their commitments into the fund and can do it in the form of a guarantee or callable capital, and that then gives ADB more leverage. And ADB AAA rated can therefore go to the markets and expand the envelope that can then be used for financing development. Second is the example of FIX, which I think is really an excellent one, because I hear a number of the candidates running for president speaking about reforms. The one that's linked to this is the one of the candidates mentions, which is to open up and restructure the financial architecture of Africa, to make sure that the regional and national development banks work better together. And I think FIX has done that for a number of years to show the way. And through this ability to crowd in the capital from BOAD, from TDB, Afri-Exim Bank, Fagas, Africa Re, which have guarantees, you have insurance, you have development capital, all of that can be brought together to really leverage and contribute even more to the ADF opportunity. And then lastly, and I think this is one where the African Development Bank has been very successful on its syndication desk. And one opportunity space is to do concessional syndication. So to actually crowd in impact investors and others who will come into financing that may not require changing of the charter or having new types of arrangements, but can syndicate concessional windows of finance that could then be deployed rapidly. So those three, I think, are available. The rest of it would require deeper reforms, one of which, again, creating a private sector arm at the African Development Bank, because 30% of IFC's profits are redeployed into IDA at the World Bank. Unfortunately, African Development Bank doesn't have that right now, but it could create a private sector part of it that invests in the private sector, which we all know is very much needed, but then the profits from that can be redeployed into funding ADF sustainably into the outer years. And this is why I know I insist a lot on capital market reform, domestic resource mobilization, all of that, but those can only materialize if we are also able to have conduits that those investments can then go into. And ADF can be catalytic in that capability for the project preparation facilities, de-risking, and many of the ideas shared here. So I think we have a lot of opportunity, and I'm quite excited actually for the future. Thank you.
I think that paints a really excellent picture on the catalytic nature of ADF for domestic resource mobilization, for building this domestic financial architecture within the continent and pulling in also partnership and innovation. At that all, we are reaching the end of our session here. We have one last question. There's a hand in front there. Okay, we can take two and we'll rapid fire respond to them.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, hello, my name is Agustina Abriano. I'm coordinator for outreach and development at the Club de Madrid, which is a forum of former heads of state and government that work for the promotion of democracy and democratic practice. And we talked about the private sector, and we know it's, for many of us, a reality that we need to engage with them to secure the gap in financing for development. But this has also caused a lot of controversy among civil society. So I wanted to know, particularly from the representatives of government, what would you say to those who really question the private sector entering at this new level of engagement? Thank you.
Thank you. And there's one last question in front here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hannah Ryder from Development Reimagined. And just a little plug for a policy brief that we have just published on the ADF history, and thanks to AFDB colleagues for having shared the data that went into that. But what we're really trying to enable a discussion around ADF is both sort of how it has progressed, and I think we've heard some really great, some really very useful information today through this discussion on the progression, but it's also the future and where ADF will go going forwards. And I just wondered, in particular, one of the issues that the policy brief points out is, around how do we get more African member states to contribute to the, we've had Angola being the first from 1996 and so on, but how do we incentivize African member states? And I just wondered if we could have a stronger answer on that from the panelists, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Just watching the time here, so here's what we'll do. We'll offer every candidate the parting shots. So just tell us your last sort of closing remarks. What do you want us to go away with? And in your parting shots, there are two questions in there that if you could sprinkle an answer to, it'd be great. One around the controversy of private sector participation, and the second around African sort of skin in the game. How do we incentivize more skin in the game? I'm sorry I'm crunching your time, but I'll allow you probably half a minute to give us your parting shot and squeeze in one of those responses. Adama, we'll start. Actually, let's start with you, Ryan. Ryan, we can start.
Yeah, just quick response there. It is important to get new sources of money from the private sector, but it's also very important to keep with the standards we have already. And we have a meeting on Friday with like-minded countries, with NGOs and CSOs, and it's done across all the NDBs, and it's really important to sort of hear what the issues are, hear what the concerns are, but then for us to stress then the social safeguards that are in this bank and the other banks as well too. And that's a key thing, particularly if it's taxpayer money, that we cannot lower our standards or have damage caused to the environment or indigenous people, etc., etc. So I think that's the first thing there. The second thing then, as I said earlier, ADF, it's a great opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity as well. I think it's a great chance, again, to highlight the good work it does, and then also then to highlight the investment needs, I think that are needed for Africa in terms of fiscal and infrastructure, but also human capital then as well too. And I think you're selling it to the existing donors, parliamentarians, etc., the private sector people again, but then to new donors who are outside Africa, people who give money to IDA already, but then to African countries as well. And you could also look at people like the European Commission, EIB as well, who could actually invest in the ADF. They don't have to be members of the bank, but they can also invest in it. And lastly then, one of the banks that I'm involved in, the EBRD, are moving into sub-Saharan Africa. The African Development Bank has been very welcoming, along with IFC as well, and IDA. And I think this is the key way going forward, of more collaboration, more close working by the NDBs on key issues such as, we'll say, technical assistance for project preparation, private sector engagement, etc., etc. I'll leave it there, thanks.
Excellent. Adama, over to you.
Yes, thank you. 3 points from me, very short. The first one is, how do you make sure that efficiencies goes with footprint? And it is a matter of the size of the African Development Bank and the ADF to support the African Development Bank investments. I mean, if you look at the globe, IDB in Latin America, in the Caribbean, they do a lot. Almost the size of the World Bank or more. In Europe, the investment from the EIB are bigger than the investment of the World Bank in Europe. It's only in Africa, then you have the World Bank investing more than the African Development Bank as a regional bank. So I think at some point, having the African Development Bank being sizable enough for the countries to sense also where their contribution went, I mean, the African members, it's really important that the African Development Bank become the African Development Bank and not just an international bank for Africa. And at some point, I think that also is a matter of partnership to make sure that the investments that the World Bank or the IFDs or the other international DFIs are doing, they're doing with the African Development Bank. That means also that the shareholders need to be coherent at some point. The same shareholders you will find at the African Development Bank are the one that you find at the national institutions all over the place, and the one you will find on the rest of the multilateral system. So it means that the norms or the cooperation agreements they have together should also be coherent in this system. I was very happy to see that the MDBs are saying working out the system, and that's where finance in common, which we call FIX, and this ecosystem also is saying, okay, it has to be coherent also at the regional with the national level as well. So it means that if we have a co-financing agreements, partnership agreements between AFD, African Development Bank, and World Bank, it has to be something that help the system go faster and be more impactful for the countries that are chipping in this side.
Excellent.
Sustainability has to be the new norm. So I think for the CSOs on the private sector, if they come in, they have to follow the same rules. Than what the public is expecting and what the government are expecting in this regard. And for sure, by sustainability, I mean respecting the SDGs and taking into account also the civil society as efficiency watchers, and for sure to be contributing in this debate and making the policies more efficient.
Thank you, Adama. Franny?
Yes, thank you very much. 3 quick points. First, keep the current shareholders happy. How? Being more efficient, speedy, telling the story so that civil society, Hannah, and your colleagues can fight for ADF. But thirdly, opening up innovation so that the private sectors in the current shareholder countries can contribute. Second, bring in new shareholders from countries that are willing to support Africa but are currently not. But also within Africa itself, bringing in member countries. And we must really congratulate Benin for joining. It's not a very wealthy country, but it saw the value. So other countries should come in. And then third, to really use the market. I think we can really benefit from market solutions for ADF. As Valerie said, African Development Bank did it first. Then she didn't mention, she was very polite, but others like the World Bank copied African Development Bank. So the AFDB is the home of innovation. So I think can really push those market solutions to get ADF funding? Because there are lots of impact investors out there that are looking to do more. And let's give them the space because we can use it in Africa. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Fanny. Chris, I'll go to you, and Valerie, you have the last word before I call Dowda up. Chris, your parting shots.
And watching out for adverse consequences, and that's why we maintain a really close dialogue with CSOs, which we find really helpful. And then just quickly on incentives for countries to make the journey from being recipients of the ADF to donors. I thought it was a great story having the IDA replenishment in South Korea this year, and just telling that story so clearly of a country that has been on that journey, and would love to see similar examples of African countries, proudly talking about their trajectory, and maybe having the G20 in South Africa at the end of the year is a good opportunity for South Africa to use that incredible platform that they've got to show leadership internationally on encouraging contributions and stepping up themselves as well.
Thank you. And Valerie, well, let's just have the last word for the panel.
Sure, thank you very much. So on the question of private sector, I also don't feel that there is an ideological sort of contradiction in asking them to come in and help with development. I think what's important is that the regulatory framework for whatever sector that they're in is well thought out and also applied. So let me just give you a quick example. If you're trying to grow, let's say, a cashew sector within your country, most of the product is for export, but something is maintained locally. You'd want to know that you're growing that particular sector, so you might say 10 or 20% of that has to be transformed locally, and also that you build a market for that so that everything is not just sold elsewhere. You don't build up the skills required for that industry. On the question of African countries and their support to ADF, I think that what we've done thus far is to, and what in fact they've done, is to start with a few countries and that are now sort of snowballing. And so we will get announcements for ADF-17, which have been more than ADF-16. And I think that that's really the only way to continue. Ultimately, we must grow the economies of the clients that we serve so that they can really afford to become members of, full members, and we call them state participants in the ADF. Currently, only Angola is a full state participant, but we have contributions, regular contributions from countries such as South Africa, Egypt has given in the past. And so I think what we really have to do is to make sure that we do our work, that they have the funding in order to pay the entry fee, in a sense, to join ADF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And to close us out, I want to call Dowda Sembe, who's the founder and CEO of AfriCatalyst. He is no stranger to the continent, has worked in the Center for Global Development and 23 countries as the director for IMF Fund, where he represented 23 African countries. Dowda, we've had a rich conversation today. Please let us know how to summarize this moment and where to go with this.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I would like to actually start by giving a big round of applause to our very distinguished panelists here. And I have to actually to say at the beginning that I won't be able to do what Sarah just asked me. The discussion was so rich that it's very difficult to summarize them into 2 or 3 minutes. So what I will do, first of all, of course, is to thanks again, actually, the panelists. And I think the discussion have actually have given us actually various perspectives. We do have perspective from, of course, representative from governments, a representative from DFIs, representative, of course, from the private sector, and of course, advocates. And I think that has been very much helpful in understanding what we are talking about today. I think the case was made that Africa is facing a big needs right now in terms of financing. And that financing, I think we are talking about trillions around the world, of which more than $3 trillion, as one of the panelists said, of which almost half is actually for Africa alone. And if we want to meet that financing need, of course, I think it was very much understood that ADF has to play a big role for many reasons, and I won't get back to the reasons. But what we, of course, discussed about this is the importance of really very much ensuring a successful ADF-17 replenishment. This is critical to allow the African Development Bank to play its role and to make sure that it supports African countries and as they try to move forward towards the the SDGs. So I think the discussion today actually can be summarized in 3 words, and I think Franny helped me with summarizing those key takeaways. The first one is, of course, to make sure that your current shareholders and contributors are happy, and making sure that you leverage their contribution to the extent possible. So I think this is the first task that Valerie and her team are definitely working on, and we do know that they are doing so with a lot of depth and a lot of energy. So we definitely need traditional donors and contributors to the ADF to very much contribute as much as they can. Second, you need to, of course, bring new shareholders. And I think when we talked about bringing new shareholders, we are talking about, first of all, African countries to tap in and, of course, have some skin in the game, as Hannah was saying. It's critical. And we have seen countries doing so, like Benin. So we very much like to have more and more African countries doing that. And not only countries, but also we also need to bring in African institutions. I think some of the panelists have talked about the role that the financial institution in Africa, but also institutional investors in Africa could play by partnering with the banks as part of the ADF. This is something that is very much critical. And last but not least, I think a lot of talk has been made about innovation from the ADF part, from the bank's part, but also the importance of partnerships, making sure that actually we partner more, not only with government, but also with the private sector, with advocates, with civil society, and I think that's definitely something that will be needed for a historic and successful ADF-17 replenishment. And my sense is with all the energy and all the sort of intent and all the motivation that we have seen today from government, from also private sector, from advocate, we should be able to do it, and we will do it. So thank you very much to all of you. Let me finish by, first of all, thanking our partner, One. So as we at AfriCatalyst were very much privileged to have this opportunity to work with One, Sarah and her team to set up this event. Second, I would like to thank once again, and not enough, our panelists, our distinguished panelists who very much are extremely busy at this time, but they found time to be with us and to very much share their perspective. And of course, finally, last but not least, I would like to thank the audience, those of you who are in the room and those of the others who are actually following us online right now. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation and hopefully, of course, to making sure that we partner with the bank and ADF team to make sure that their endeavor is successful. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.